Recording. I didn't want to do that. All right, recording again. There we go. So we tried baseball and it didn't work. When we talk about Agile frameworks, we are looking for ways to help us implement the values and principles from Agile. So as a reminder, we'll look at these together. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So we don't tell people how to work. We don't tell people what tools they have to use, what processes they have to follow. The only role that processes and tools have is further empowering individuals in their interactions. Value working software over comprehensive documentation. This was, and what we mean by documentation, diagrams, plans, binders, meetings, all that stuff is our comprehensive documentation. Having a lot of documentation doesn't mean we have anything done. Working software means that we have things that are done. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation means that we're not trying to lawyer ball each other or catch each other or trying to prevent scope creep or any of those things. We're trying to work together against the problem. And when reality disagrees, we go with reality over what our plan was. And again, it's not no processes, no tools, no documentation, no contracts, no plans. It's just when these two things come into conflict, the ones on the left win. So like, this is a pretty broad philosophy. Like you can apply this to all kinds of stuff. If you swap out the word software for like work, like this will apply to pretty much anything. On the other hand, we need a practical way to implement this stuff in our work. So we have frameworks for that give us actual systems that we can follow. There's a couple popular ones. If we say that Agile is our like philosophy, down at the framework level, we have a couple frameworks that help us stay agile. Scrum is by far the most popular, although like with an asterisk, which we'll talk about in a sec. There's another one called XP. Kanban technically predates Agile by like 30 years, but especially as applied to software, very compatible with Agile processes and principles and values. And then the new kid on the block is a horror show called Safe. These three have a lot more in common than they don't. And so we're going to focus on Scrum today, but a lot of the ideas, there's either very similar things or identical things in the other frameworks as well. The exception of that is Safe. If you might remember our traditional project planning process where we do all the requirements gathering and then all the planning and all the executing and all of the testing and all the deployment. What was this called?
Waterfall.
Waterfall. So waterfall that's the pejorative word for it. Traditional project management is like the neutral term for it. But even that, like nobody wants to be traditional, nobody wants to be waterfall. So now they're Safe, which is the scaled agile framework. Scaled agile is waterfall. Surprise. So we don't give a fuck about that. So let's talk about how Scrum works. Scrum first thing is a team composition. There are exactly 3 roles on a Scrum team. There is a product owner, it's a product. There is a Scrum Master, and there's a team member. That's it. Those are the only 3 roles on a Scrum team. What's missing on here? That's like on lots of dev teams, engineering teams, anything like that. What do you not see?
Any form of management?
Oh, sorry, say that again?
Any form of management?
Yep. There's no manager on this. What else are we missing?
No senior, no junior.
Nope. No levels. You're not senior team member, junior team member, junior Scrum Master. What else don't we have?
Sales.
No salesperson on the team. Although we'll talk more about that in a bit. Other things we might expect to see on a dev team.
I mean, I was expecting to see like developer. Like
Yeah.
some sort of just developer.
Doesn't say developer, doesn't say designer, doesn't say QA, doesn't say infrastructure. In the Scrum world, we call this blurred roles and responsibilities. You still might have a title, still might have the title of designer, but on a Scrum team, you're only one of these 3 things. Also, you're only allowed to have 1 product owner and 1 Scrum Master. Team member, I don't know if there's like an actual limit on that, but effectively it's about 7. So on this team, you aren't your specialty. You're not your title. Everybody is working to build the product. Whoa. So I want you to think for a sec what that means. What does it mean if a team has blurred roles and responsibilities? If you don't have a separate QA or a tester or a dev or a designer or a senior dev or an architect or any of these like titles that we tend to break up teams by, how do you think that changes the team dynamic? Think to yourself for a sec. Christine, you've been around a lot of teams like this. What do you think that having those blurred roles and responsibilities, what do you think that does to your team dynamic?
It empowers all of the members of the team to kind of get things done.
Yeah, because like we're not in that's not my job world anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just the designer. I'm just the tester. And so what typically happens is you end up with a ton of people super stressed out, cranking on something, and then a bunch of people waiting for them to finish, and then they switch places. Womp womp. So instead, by having these blurred roles, everybody's just finding ways to help. Sometimes you're doing some dev, sometimes you're doing some testing, sometimes you're helping somebody else out with what they're working on. You may not be like such hot shakes as a visual designer. Doesn't mean you can't do anything. You can identify when like things on different pages are inconsistent. You can identify how easy or difficult something might be to implement. You can say, hey, there's this pattern I've been seeing a lot lately. You can still participate. And a lot of like designers that I've worked with will go, well, I'm just a designer. Okay, well, I've also worked with a lot of designers who like can also write their own CSS and are like kind of handy in Vue or kind of handy in React. As soon as you stop limiting yourself by whatever your title is, it's amazing what you can figure out how to do to help. All right, so those are our team members, people building the product. Product owner and Scrum Master, in another life, these would be collectively called a project manager. Scrum doesn't have project managers. It splits that role into these two roles, product owner and Scrum Master. So a product owner is external facing. And there's a very short list of things that a PO does. A PO says what's important, and says when something is done. That's it. A PO doesn't estimate. A PO doesn't do the work. A PO doesn't make commitments on behalf of the team. All a PO does is says, the next most important thing we have to work on is this. And then when the team delivers that, the PO says whether or not it's done. They can push it back and go, no, that's not really what I'm talking about. I meant more like this and this and this. That's it. That's their job. And the way that they're able to say what's important and whether or not something is done is that the PO is usually in very close communication with customers, users, that kind of thing. They're not the only person who's allowed to talk to customers and users. Everybody on the team is allowed to do that. But the product owner is the person who primarily owns that relationship. Scrum Master is internal facing. Scrum Master has also basically just two roles, two jobs they have to do. The one is unblock people. Somebody can't get something done because they are missing information, need feedback on something, need help, need a contractor, need something like that. That's what Scrum Master does. It might even just be, I need help from this person. Scrum Master helps make that a really easy conversation to have, sets people up, that kind of thing. And then the other one is makes sure the rules are followed. Which rules? Why? The Scrum rules, which we'll talk about those in a sec. But Scrum Master is kind of the referee. They're the ones that are saying if you are following the Scrum process correctly. Also, a Scrum Master is not allowed to make estimates or commitments on behalf of the team. Nope. The only person who's allowed to make an estimate is the person doing the work. The only people who are allowed to make a commitment are the people doing the work. Period, the end. Product owner and Scrum Master are there to help facilitate that. Ask me some questions about these three roles.
Are product owner and Scrum Master like in a typical developer like sense, or do they code at all or no?
Don't have to, often do. I think like some super good SMs and POs are either former or also programmers. A lot of them are former PMs that got super into Agile. So you don't have to be technical. I think it helps, but not a requirement.
Are these certifications that you get, or are they more titles that go along with your position within a company?
They are roles on a Scrum team. They can also be titles, and there are absolutely certifications for them. But if you are doing Scrum, you have one of these three roles on a team.
Kyle, who sets the rules?
Who sets the rules of Scrum?
Yes.
The Scrum Alliance. This kind of ends up like being that South Park thing where in the future the United Atheist Coalition is at war with like Atheists Unlimited or whatever. There's like two main organizations that that maintain the Scrum rulebook, and they are currently suing each other. But it is an externally provided set of rules.
Does the team as a whole then come up with how they want to work within those rules?
Yes.
Do those roles ever fluctuate? Like people changing them?
Yeah, I've actually heard a lot recently of people like taking turns being the Scrum Master. And that's like, I don't love that, but I think that's better than not having one, which is what a lot of organizations will do instead. They'll take their project manager, make them like a PO and go, we can't afford a Scrum Master, and then do some fucking half-assed version of Scrum that doesn't work super well. It's way better for people to take turns being a Scrum Master than that. I think the consistency is also valuable though. I see that less with POs because the product owner is supposed to own the output of the team. They're the person who's accountable for that. And so I think it's hard to generate enough of a sense of ownership, at least that style of ownership, if you're only doing it every 2 weeks, or if you're only doing it for 2 weeks every couple months. Other questions about these three roles?
What's the role of the team member?
To actually make the product. Product owner doesn't make the product. Scrum Master doesn't make the product. Team member makes the product.
So would the Scrum Master essentially also act as like the fresh pair of eyes on code?
Totally. Scrum Master is really like a utility player in this. A lot of their work is like management by walking around kind of stuff. They run the ceremonies, and Scrum is pretty heavy on ceremonies. But also, they want to walk around, checking on people, see how they're doing, see how they can help, see what they can unblock, see what conversations they can facilitate. And so, fuck, yeah, I'll give you a code review. I'll wrangle up some test users for you. I'll find somebody else to review your code. Another thing that like is involved in Scrum Master stuff is in big companies, there's always like, oh man, Kyle's pretty good with data modeling, right? Can we just borrow him real quick? The Scrum Master is the person who says no. They're protecting the integrity of the team, preventing outside distractions. And so a lot of times that'll be, I'll go to the meeting for you. I'll figure out like if it's appropriate for you to help, I'll take notes, but they're protecting your time and attention.
Particularly in high, like maybe very specific fields, would it be, I guess I've known that product owners like might not necessarily be able to code, like their experiences from the,
Sure.
is that they were the client. Is that common?
Oh yeah. Well, I'd say that's
Like
more
they,
common.
once upon a time they were a client and now.
Yeah. Like
Okay.
if I had my druthers, I'd want that person to be a product owner more than a developer.
So, and where's the line, I guess, with the product owner and then when the user story is created? Are they like, this is what's important, but write that user story how you want, or
So
do they write the story?
Anybody can write a user story. We'll talk about those next. Anybody can write a user story. The product owner just gets to pick which one is the most important.
Okay.
Other questions about this? Okay, so these are the players. Let's talk about the game a little bit. So in Scrum, you are working in iterations that are called sprints. Sprints are anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, but usually 2. 2 is kind of the like recommended default. Within a sprint, you are trying to work through your backlog. A backlog is a collection of stories. A story is an independently valuable feature to a user. That part's important. If your user can't tell, it's not a story. So whack Scrum teams will do things like, hey, check out this new story. As a database, I want to be 20% faster so that I'm less sad. Like, that's not a user story. There's no technical user stories. There's also no design user stories. It's something that a user can tell. Now, a totally valuable user story might be something like, as a user, I want this product to load half a second faster. And then the way you do that is by speeding something up in the database. But it's always from the user's perspective. So we come up with these stories and then we collect them in a backlog. So there's actually 2 backlogs. One's called the product backlog. The other one's called the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is a collection of stories we are working on this sprint. So you decide that ahead of time. You go, all right, so our backlog has 20 stories in it. We're going to take these 5, which the product owner said are the most important, and we're going to put those in our sprint backlog. And we're going to work on these for the next 2 weeks. The sprint lengths don't vary between sprints. You have to pick one and roll with it. Changing your sprint length is like, that's bad news. So if you're doing 2 weeks, all right, these 2 weeks, we're doing these 5 stories. There's your initial vocabulary. Ask me some questions about sprints and backlogs and stories.
So sprint backlogs are thin vertical slices of the actual backlog.
I suppose that's a way of thinking of it. A story is a thin vertical slice. A sprint backlog is a thin vertical slice of the product backlog. Yeah, that's good. I'll take that. More questions about the game?
Is there ever like a limit of amount of stories in like a sprint backlog, or is that just based on how much you think you need to get done? Or
it's just based on how much you think you can get done, but we'll talk in a sec about some ways we can be a little more disciplined about how we pick how much that is. But no, there's no like imposed limit.
Is the value of the story to the user determined by the product owner?
Effectively, yeah. But they're trying to do it as the representative of the user.
So is there a side thing or like a background thing that handles organizing the design or backend features that are not user specific?
There is nothing that is not user specific. The entire reason you need a backend, the reason you need design, the reason you need all of those things is because it's valuable to the user. If it's not valuable to the user, it's not important.
So it's a matter of like perspective.
Correct. And it ends up focusing the team on things that matter. Because a lot of times you can gold plate, which is adding features that nobody wants but are cool sounding. You can optimize things that aren't problems. If you can't point to a reason why at least one user isn't impacted or doesn't care or isn't somehow benefiting from this, then it's not a story, and you probably shouldn't build it. Another thing though, like you can do work that isn't a story. In Scrum terms, those are called tasks. So sometimes migrating something from one version of something to another version of something, it might speed up work, but it's really important that you separate stuff like that from stuff that's providing value. Otherwise, you can over prioritize those tasks instead of doing things that somebody else actually wants. Cool, let's keep going. So every 2 weeks, we're taking some amount of stories off of the product backlog, putting them onto the sprint backlog. So during a sprint, we got some ceremonies. On day one, we're starting day one with we call planning poker. So in planning poker, we take our stories from the sprint backlog, and one by one, the team takes a look at them and goes, all right, so as a user, I want to see a list of my pets. And everybody on the team takes cards and they go, all right, let's see, I think that's a 5. And you hold up your estimate of the relative level of complexity of that story. And you measure that in points. Points are not an official part of Scrum. Now there's planning poker, by the way, but I would say 80% of Scrum teams use points in planning poker. The idea of a point, most common system is Fibonacci sequence. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. How complex is this? Not how long do you think it will take? Not how important do you think it is? How relatively complex? There's some different systems for getting your initial like point value, but like, fuck man, like it honestly doesn't matter. It's like, it's whose line is it anyway? Everything's a story and the points don't matter. So the most common thing is do something together, like get a splash page up. All right, that's a 1. Relative to that, would you call this a 2, a 3, a 5, an 8, or a 13? And they intentionally get more spaced out as they go up, because that's reflecting the amount of uncertainty. If you're calling something a 13, you can't tell whether or not it's a 12 or a 14. You don't have that kind of precision. as you continue to work together, it is shocking how accurate people's first guesses at planning poker get. So we say that points end up being an accurate way of estimating, even if they're not a precise way of estimating. So the planning poker, I go, all right, I think this is a 5. Everybody else holds up their cards at the same time. The traditional way that this is done is if everybody has the same number, bang-a-rang, we're good. If the numbers are different, somebody with the lowest card and somebody with the highest card publicly argue in favor of their estimate. And from that process, what usually happens is you get a ton of detail and ideas that sort of surface out of this. You go like, 5? Oh no, man, I have that one as an 8 for sure. Why do you think it's an 8? Well, did you keep in mind that we have to do this and this and this? Ah, shit, I really didn't. Or someone would go like, no, dude, that's easily a 2. We already did most of that work with some other story. We can reuse most of that. Oh man, that's pretty good. Never thought about that. So you have that conversation and then you do it again. And the goal is to get everybody to converge on a single number. And then that is the story point estimate for a particular story. And then you do that until you have pointed the sprint backlog. You can also start going into like some of the next stuff and the product backlog. That's not like an official part of the process, but some people like having their like a few of the next features pointed also. But really the point of this is to get a sense of what is involved with these stories. We don't have our comprehensive documentation. We don't have all the diagrams. We don't have a business analyst that told us everything that the story is. Because if they could have told us that shit with enough detail, you know what doing that with enough detail is called? Programming. There's always some ambiguity in there. And so rather than trying to smash out the ambiguity with documents that literally are incapable of capturing the complexity, we go, okay, cool. Our understanding of this exists up here. It's a shared, like, mental understanding of what this is. It's another thing. It's not precise, it's accurate. That's what we care about. Accuracy, not precision. All right, so we do our planning, figure out what these things are, and then every day we start with the stand-up. Hey, we do those. Scrum stand-ups are a little bit different than what we do, but the spirit of them is basically the same. So the point of a stand-up is not a status update. That's how you ruin a stand-up. The point of a stand-up is the team planning their attack on the day. And that way, it's just like how you've been doing it at Flatiron. All right, this is what we got going on right now. This is how far we've come. Who's got a dentist appointment today? Does anybody have any ideas of how we could approach this problem? Is anything at risk right now? Is anybody blocked on anything? And the reason it's not a status update is you're not performing these things for a manager. You're not performing them for the Scrum Master or the VP of product or whoever happens to be there. You're having this conversation with each other. There's a word that was really common in Scrum a while ago that got scrubbed out. It was commitment. And it got scrubbed out because people took it as like an excuse to make people work nights and weekends and do a whole bunch of shit that's very not agile. But the idea was originally supposed to be, we care about delivering these things to our customers and our users, and we care about each other in our work. So every day we are renewing our collective commitment to each other and to deliver the things that we said we were going to deliver this sprint. And they're supposed to be fast. The reason they're called stand-ups is you're supposed to stand while you do them. Because at some point, everybody starts looking for somewhere to sit down, and that's your hint that you've gone on too long. I'd say like the ones we do at Flatiron are about the correct length. But you'll hear about people who have hour-and-a-half long stand-ups, 45-minute long stand-ups. That is not the rules. Scrum Master is supposed to stop that stuff. And it's natural. People want to have conversations about things. People will want to dig in on something, actually solve the problems. That's not what you're doing. You're figuring out when those conversations can happen, who should be involved in them, that kind of stuff. Stand-up's supposed to be quick. So we do those every day. And then on the last day, come on. Couple things happen. You demo your work to an external stakeholder. The customer representative, a user. But this is like a non-negotiable part of this. And the entire team has to be there. The team presents their work. And they only present things that are done. Not works in progress, not previews, none of that. Only what they got done. You may be thinking, well, what if they didn't get anything done? They have to stand up in front of the customer and say they didn't get anything done. It's embarrassing. It's part of the rules. So you do that demo, and then you retro. You talk about how could we have done this better? What things we want to make sure we keep doing on the team? What things do we want to start doing that we haven't been doing? What things should we never do again? But that's one of the ceremonies.
Kyle, during the retro, I guess maybe during the demo, is there a chance for feedback from the customer, the client, the whoever, to be able to bring into the retro and process as a team?
Absolutely. Yeah, the customer can go, cool, this is nothing like what I had in mind. I hate it. Or they can go, this is exactly what I asked for, and now that I'm seeing it, I fucking hate it. Like, those things happen all the time. That's part of why you're doing it. And then you go, okay, cool, we got to change it. That becomes a new story, which can go into the next sprint. Rinse and repeat. This is the game of Scrum. Now, can anybody tell me why I had you read that "We tried baseball and it didn't work" article at the beginning of this? Guesses?
Would that be the retro side?
No, good guess. Why did I have you read that "We tried baseball and it didn't work" article?
Was it kind of like a cautionary tale? Like in the example, they picked baseball apart to the point where it wasn't even baseball?
Yep. It's also related to why we have a person whose like primary job is making sure that the rules are followed. These people are grown-ups. They figure out the rules. It's because 9 times out of 10, somebody goes, oh man, we did Scrum at this one company I worked for. It was fucking terrible. Everybody hated it. Now, we didn't really do sprints. Our sprints were like 3 or 4 months long. And our points were absolutely time-based. Like they were just days, how many days you were estimating something was going to take. The product owner did all the planning poker themselves. Our stand-ups were done for the VP of product. They took about an hour and a half. We never demoed for the customer because customers are too busy. We can't waste their time with those kinds of things. The Scrum Master and the product owner did the demo, the retro themselves, and then told us what they planned on doing differently. All the stories were pointed and fleshed out, and we just get cards that they hand us that have the work that we're supposed to do. Somebody has a bad time with Scrum, that's what happens every single fucking time. And it's usually because an experienced developer goes, that sounds all right. I need to tweak that a little bit though, because some of this doesn't sound very realistic. Some of this feels like it doesn't scale. Some of this feels like, I don't know, we just can't have blurred roles. Like this designer can't really do anything but design. Oh, it's all right. I got it. I'll preach you their food for them. That happens in all the Agile stuff. It happens in Scrum more than anything else.
Why is it more prevalent in Scrum?
Because Scrum has more of these kinds of things. So it's a lot easier to go, I want to tweak that one part. I don't know what purpose it serves in this. And I don't know why it's in there. So I'll probably just yank it out. Oh no, the game isn't fun anymore. Or you'll get people who go, well, I mean, the whole point is that we're not supposed to value processes and tools over individuals and interactions. So I adapted this process to just be whatever I wanted it to be. Cool. There's no law in Agile saying you have to do Scrum or that you have to do it this way. How did it work? Hated it. Everybody was miserable. Didn't get anything done. Weird. Now, one like finer point I'll make, this is Scrum. This is Scrum. Anything else is not Scrum. Period. The end. If you don't have a Scrum Master, you are not doing Scrum. That'd be like saying, we're playing baseball, we don't have a pitcher. Well, it's not really baseball. Yeah, we don't demo, though. We demo to each other. That might be awesome. That might work really well for your team. It's not Scrum, though. The term for that in the Agile community is Scrum butt. It's Scrum, but I fixed it.
Which do you think is more, I get nobody's perfect, right? So maybe we all have these project experiences in whatever framework we did it. Which do you think is more, I guess there's different ways of looking at it, like toxic for the team members, the people involved, when it doesn't go right, and then the product, whether it's like Waterfall or Agile?
I would say that like Waterfall, like never again. I'm not doing any more Waterfall projects for the rest of my career. They're too heartbreaking. Because like it ends up, I saw a really good diagram of this the other day. If this is color right, if this is Earth, we got our, these are my comments. We got the Earth and we got the moon. We're trying to get to the moon. Agile is, we go here, then we go here, then we go here, then we go here, then we go here. Waterfall is nope, nope, nope. We went through the moon. I can't do that anymore. I think it's dehumanizing. Now, of the Agile approaches, Kanban is the hardest to fuck up. And so Kanban is very non-prescriptive. So like, and we're back to our framework kind of thing, right? Opinionated versus unopinionated frameworks. Kanban is the unopinionated one. Scrum is the Rails. Kanban's the React. So I would say like, to like dip your toe into it, Kanban is probably like the safest way to do it. It also like has the like least impact by itself. XP is more Rails than Rails. XP is extremely dogmatic because none of this tells you how you do the work. XP is all of these kinds of things, and you are not allowed to write code without a pair. You are not allowed to write code that doesn't have a failing test first. You're not allowed to write code without a continuous integration server setup. So XP is also dogmatic about that stuff. And I spent a lot of like my early Agile career feeling like, that's bullshit. We don't tell people how to work, man. I've been radicalized. Over the last 2 years, I've gradually like gone over to the XP side because it ends up being like one of these things where those practices are so highly correlated with quality that if you're committed to not doing them, you're committed to low quality. So I guess I really couldn't come up with any good defense of like not doing TDD anymore or not pairing.
I guess I could see how people would be like, I much prefer Waterfall because it's painless throughout the process. It's heartbreaking at the end when we realize we have to start again, but throughout we all thought we were doing a great job.
and also, like, it's so depersonalized. What do I give a shit whether or not the product wins, fails, whatever? All I do is this little part of it. I just write requirement docs, man. Don't get mad at me if the thing didn't work. Hey, man, I didn't have anything to do with the product. I just test it, and I'm telling you it doesn't work. I'm a very good tester. Don't blame me, man. The specs I got from the business analysts were bullshit. Like, I wrote the code that I was asked to write. Get off my ass about it. You're very insulated from the ultimate result of your work in these processes. Not with this, not when you're standing in front of your customer going like, yeah, I didn't get anything done these last 2 weeks. Started a bunch of stuff, but sorry. Hard to be insulated from that. On the other hand, you also get to go, oh man, and check this part out. You also get to have some pride in your work. But it's really leveraging these individuals and interactions, not just within the team, between the team and the customer also. Because you're not just like, I wrote bad code. It's like, fuck, man, Bob kind of pays my mortgage, and like, I don't let Bob down. He's a super good guy. Throughout the week, like, I was able to ask Bob questions, show him a couple of different things, get feedback on it. It was awesome. Customer becomes your teammate, not your opponent.
So with the Agile frameworks, are any of them applicable for a single person? Or are they all team-based?
Kanban, there's even like a whole discipline around personal Kanban. That's pretty common. Scrum doesn't make, like, unless you have at least 3 people, you're not doing Scrum. XP is a little bit more flexible in that regard, but you need at least 2. And then, like, I think that the team at Flatiron, the instructional team, it's the most agile team I've ever been on. And we don't use any of these. You don't have to use a framework. And we like pinch and borrow from these. But Kanban you can do off the shelf by yourself. And my wife does personal Kanban, actually. And for a while, we did it around the house for like chores and stuff.
Does Scrum stand for anything? Like,
no, that's a great question. It is not an acronym, and so don't write it in all capital letters. That's like a great way to tell a recruiter who has no fucking clue what they're talking about. Agile and Scrum are like, neither of them are acronyms. Scrum is, anybody know? Sports term.
From rugby.
Rugby.
Rugby, there we go. Of course, Paige has it. That's a Scrum. It's supposed to be all of us working together as like one unit. Another bit of like business history. It also comes from this HBR article from 1986 called The New Product Game. This predates Agile by 15 years, but describes a lot of the things that eventually became Agile. Other questions? Keep in mind, I'm going to ask you to do this in a sec. Talked about different frameworks. We talked about what a Scrum team looks like. Talked about 2 different kinds of backlogs. Talked about stories. Talked about sprints. Talked about the flow through the week, demo, retro. We didn't mention backlog grooming. Backlog grooming is anybody can come up with a story. That's not a thing that like any one person does. Customer can do it. You can do it. A team member can do it. Scrum Master, product owner, anybody can come up with a story. And so periodically you get things in there that like aren't important anymore or are suddenly very important or need to be split. A lot of times somebody will go into the backlog. It's like, this is like a fucking 400. And so it needs to be decomposed. And that's often a Scrum Master and a product owner going through the backlog and sort of tearing those things apart. Other questions about Agile frameworks? All right, I would like each and every one of you to write me a Slack message and describe at least 3 aspects of Scrum. I'll hang out in the call. I'll give you a couple minutes. Awesome. If you're still writing, send it in. I want to see it. Jay, I loved your answer. Would you read it out loud, please?
Yeah, sure. There are three aspects of Scrum. I just started with that. There are three roles in Scrum: product owner, Scrum Master, and team member. Everyone involved in the project is one of these roles. In the game of Scrum, you have sprints that are usually 1 to 4 weeks, usually 2 weeks long. During this sprint, you are working through your sprint backlog, which is a collection of stories from your product backlog. On day 1 of a sprint, everyone on the team plays planning poker to assign points to each story based on estimated difficulty. Every day after starts with a stand-up where we discuss the goals for the day. On the last day, the whole team demos the product to the customer and then looks back on the sprint to see what they should do differently or what worked well.
Very nice. Well done, well done, well done. All right. So in the process of working through that, any new questions come up before we wrap?
No, but we've just described the cadence of our life at Flatiron.
Yeah, I remember when Brian started digging into Agile stuff, he was like, oh, this is like what our school does. It's like, yep, it's not an accident. Cool. Well, you really have to twist my arm to get me to talk about Kanban or fucking anything else. So you guys want to talk more Agile? I'm always game. Thank you very much for your time. Survey's coming out now.